Excellent to have you here, everyone. Welcome back. You don't seem tired at all after the lunch. I think there was spontaneous meetings in both sides of the room on campaigning and mobilization in the lead up to Sevilla. So I think the room is catching fire. It's really, really excellent. My name is Tove Riding, and I coordinate the tax team at Eurodad, and I also facilitate this panel, which is going to be a very, very exciting discussion on what does success look like in Sevilla? And we have a very distinguished panel here. So one thing to be aware of is that some panelists will be speaking Spanish, as it was just announced. So please do get your headset if you don't speak Spanish. Great. And as you can see, we have 5 speakers, and hopefully we'll also have time for some debate at the end. So we will dive in right away. We have 1.5 hours. The first pleasure I have is to give the floor. What we have in Spain is now a special ambassador for financing for development. And as was just noted in passing, it's really good to see that you still look relaxed and happy. Yeah, on the 4th of July, we will buy you a coffee or a champagne, depending on how Sevilla goes. No, but Monica Colomier, we're so happy to have you, and thank you for coming and meeting the little civil society gang that we have. And we're really, really excited to hear what you're thinking about what a success in Sevilla will look like.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here with you, with this very distinguished and energetic gang, and also to be part of this panel, to be part of this conversation. I really look forward to hearing, to listen from you, because we are also in this listening mode, on the road to Sevilla. It's important to have you all in, so it's important for us to be here, and we are very grateful for that. I think you are asking the key questions, the questions we have been asking ourselves from the beginning, no? What are the key factors or triggers necessary for ensuring the success of FfD4? What would be the consequence of governments failing to fulfill expectations at FfD4? Let me focus first in the first very easy question on what should be measure of success. And for us, a very simple answer would be a transformative change. We need transformative change for the FfD agenda that enable us to accelerate the implementation of SDGs. And for that, we need an ambitious outcome document. And over the coming months, we need to build consensus on very critical issues where developing countries have a very high expectation for change and improvement. And this is the case for debt and international financial architecture, but also on other areas like taxation or development cooperation. And Sevilla, building on the achievement of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, should make a difference and should put on the table solutions for real problems. And trying to deepen on the key factors, key triggers, for ensuring the success of Sevilla. For us, it would be very important to match ambition with action. We need concrete actions in the short term and be in the outcome document, but also we need some mandates. We need processes. We know that there will be some questions and issues that will not be resolved by Sevilla, and Sevilla is not the end of the road. For us, it's also to open some roads and to establish a roadmap for the future. So with this double track, we are trying to identify concrete actions, but also this kind of mandates. And we are quite happy with the zero draft, as some of these actions are already there. And let me focus on some of them. First, on debt, concrete actions. Spain has been advocating for debt pause clauses to be harmonized and automatically included by all creditors, and for cases not just of a climate crisis, but also for food security or health crisis. Second, we are advocating for debt swaps for SDGs, and in a more like long-term vision, we'd like to promote a dialogue between United Nations, Paris Club, and other official creditors, on the need to reflect on how to improve the restructuring debt process. On IFA, International Financial Architecture, we need it to be inclusive, to be more fair and more representative of developing countries. And we are also asking for gender parity by 2030 in the decisions, the decision-making process of international financial institutions. But also we need to reinforce the financial safety network. I wait a bit. Yes, more expectation.
Yeah, this is a campaign action. It's organized by Epson. That's very
Good. Okay, very timing, very timing. Yes, and we are a pioneer of SDRs. We think that this is a key instrument that we need, as countries, to try to explore more innovative ways to use them. And we are asking, and we are trying to include a commitment for the rechanneling of the at least 50% of SDRs 2021 allocation, as Spain has committed. On taxation, for us, the fight against inequality is key in this agenda. For sure, we don't have to forget about eradication of poverty and hunger, but we have seen the increase of inequalities, and we need to do our best to try to reinforce this combat. And on that, we see that the need for domestic resource mobilization, but also to promote a fair and progressive tax system reforms. Also, the need to explore ways to tax the ultra-rich, to explore green taxes, and to commit ourselves with the United Nations Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. And also on the fight against illicit financial flows, we are proposing a very concrete action that is the global register on assets. Let me focus some ideas on development cooperation. We don't have to take solidarity for granted. We think we need to recommit ourselves with the commitments of the 0.7, 0.2, and to LDCs, as they have been the ones to lose the most in the last few years. But also we know that ODA is not enough. It's a very precious resource that try not to go where any other resource will get, and for us it's key for the most in need. But we need also to be smart and to try to mobilize also with ODA other resources, and to do it in the right way and with impact, and to mobilize finance, private finance with this SDG lens. And for that, it's important to work with NDBs, with national development banks, and also for us, it will be important to start this reflection of beyond GDP. We need to also to take into account that the world right now is very different. We have this kind of vulnerabilities, these inequalities increase, and we need to consider it also in the equation. And I would like to put the developing countries in the center of development cooperation agenda. And for that, we need to really reinforce this country-led platform like INFFs and to learn to work better together, to complement with the country platforms, and to include also local actors in the agenda as the ultimate implementation of SDG takes place in the territory. Let me highlight now that any of these will be transformative enough if it's not gender responsive. So we are also promoting some powerful action to give this gender perspective to the agenda with very concrete actions on gender parity, gender disaggregated data, gender responsive budgeting, and the care economy. Just last but not least, we think that we need a reinforced follow-up mechanism. This has also to be one of Sevilla legacies, to hold of us accountable and to monitor commitments. And for that, it's important to learn to work better, more coordinated between United Nations and DFIs. And finally, let me just, conscious of the time, a bit give some messages on the second very easy question. But I think this is a shorter answer, as we know, no? That if we don't manage to fulfill our expectation, the answer is failure to the people most in need, but failure also to the multilateral system. Because we know that the cost of inaction will be very high also in terms of global trust and credibility of the multilateral system. We met with Amina Mohamed in the PrepCom in New York in December, and she told us, please make Sevilla deliver, because if not, the whole system will be put into question. So I think this is a plea for all of us, not just governments, but also civil society to try to focus on deliverables, but also to try to focus on what unite us more than divide us, because we know that at the end of the day, the document will not be as ambitious as you and me would like to, but this is also the price of consensus, no? Some percentage of insatisfaction. But let me also finalize to thank you and to ask you, no, to continue with your energy, with your authoritas to do your advocacy, to do your double track outreach with societies, but also with governments, and in New York, but also in capitals, no? Just to make sure that anyone knows what is at stake, no? That's for us, it's very, very important. And 10 years after Addis Ababa Action Agenda, 5 years for the deadline, the time is now. The opportunity is Sevilla. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we're off to a very good start in a debate. On the ambition, you can definitely count on us. We agree very much on that. And now we go to our next speaker. We had a funny incident in the workshop on mobilization in the lead up to Sevilla, where the issue of the European Parliament came up, and there was rumor that they've started to work on this issue, and that there was a shadow rapporteur from the S&D group, and it turns out that Marit was in the room, so very much the finger on the pulse already, and thank you so much for joining us here, also on this panel, and we're very happy to hear your views on what we need out of Sevilla.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. As was mentioned, in the European Parliament, we are going to write a report on this Finance for Development seminar in Sevilla, on the conference, on what we think that the European Commission should bring to the conference, and that we do with all political parties. And the one who is the rapporteur for this conference is someone from the Renew group, so that's from the Liberals group, and myself, I am from the Social Democrats. And I will be, it's called The Shadow, so I will be the one who is speaking on behalf of the Social Democrats on this issue and trying to negotiate a as progressive as possible input from our sides towards the European Commission. And I want to paint a little bit of a picture of why I think this is going to be a challenge, but a challenge that we have to, of course, take up with both hands, and what we think would be important to put forward and how we should start working. For me, it's very good and it's really helpful to be here to listen to all of you. I've been able to hear a lot of good ideas already, and I think we will tap into many of your good ideas and of your knowledge in the near future, and hopefully that will help us with some good suggestions for the European Commission and for the European Union to work towards a very progressive, let's say, and also towards a text that is helpful for countries in the Global South. But I think there are 4 challenges that we are working with right now. And one is that countries in the Global North, Western countries, are looking more inwards than ever before. Not many countries have a progressive government like Spain has, so I think Ambassador Colomar painted a really good picture from her behalf, but unfortunately I think it's not fully representative for all the 27 countries within the European Union. And if you look right now at the way in which also the European Commission is preparing itself for the future, it's preparing itself for European competitiveness, it's preparing itself for the European market, to improve innovation inside the European market. It's very much looking at the belly button of ourselves in the European Union, and it's a little bit almost now I hear some of our colleagues repeating what the new president of the United States says. He says America first. Some of us say Europe first, which is of course in a globalized world where we want to collaborate together, maybe not the first thing that you have to say, that you have to come first yourself. I think most of us didn't learn that when we were young from our parents, but new times. And this also means that official development assistance from many of our countries, I come from the Netherlands. The Netherlands was always a staunch supporter of the 0.7%. We were always high up there, even above the 0.7%. And now we have made a dive going down, and also a big cut on development cooperation from the Netherlands is there to be as of next year with many other countries. So this means that the picture is going to be different. And this also means that the relationship that we have with countries in the Global South is different. This, I think, is also a challenge, because we still look at the Green Deal from the European perspective, but it's going to be the industrial Green Deal. And the industrial Green Deal has very much, I've heard the word before this morning also on the panel, focusing on extractivism, focusing on how we can get what we need from the Global South for our own economy. And that's apparently the relationship that we're planning to have with countries in the Global South. And those are the countries that we are going to negotiate with in Sevilla as well. And I think this is really a new picture in the way in which that we are collaborating with our countries in the Global South, and it will make it more difficult to move forward. A third, I think, challenging movement that we see is the anti-gender movement. The anti-gender movement was already present for some time in Europe, in our civil society organizations. They also have meetings like the ones that we have right now, but I think they discuss different things at those meetings. And we also see that they are more and more present in our debates in the European Parliament. They are more and more present, I think, in national governments, which means a real pushback on what would be the very necessary feminist agenda for development cooperation, but also the feminist agenda simply for ourselves in our own countries. And it's a pushback. It's a pushback on women's rights. It's a pushback on queer rights. It's a pushback on migrant rights. And it's there. It's very visible. And I think we're also going to see struggles. Someone this morning mentioned words do matter. We're going to see struggles with words in the text. Some countries will probably not want to have certain references to gender or certain references to what we would think is progressive wording around feminism in that text. And I think this is a movement that is really something that we have to be aware of, and let's be prepared, let's buckle up, because they're strong and stronger. Which also brings me to the fourth issue, which I think is a challenge for all of us here, is the role of civil society organizations. We have seen a debate the last weeks in the European Parliament about the funding of the LIFE program. Maybe some of you have followed this. And in this funding, NGOs, civil society organizations were funded for advocacy, for lobby working. And apparently all of a sudden now this is not good. Of course, it's okay if it's, I don't know, farmers lobby or industrial lobby, but it's not okay when it's lobby from other parts of society. So this is a big debate coming up. I saw this conference is partially financed by the European Commission. I'm not sure if this is going to be possible in the future, but let's see, let's work for it. But let's also, buckle up and see if we can get our funds and our support from other sources. So this is a little bit, I think, the picture that we're working in, which should not stop us. It should give us more energy and more energy to fight, because we really need to fight now. The surroundings have changed, and let's see if we can blow back a little bit. So 4 suggestions of things that we have started working on, but also more suggestions coming from your sides would be really helpful. Number 1, I think Ambassador Colomar already mentioned it. We need to work on the adjustment of the system, because the system is not inclusive enough at this moment, and make sure that all parties are able to participate. Also, the suggestions that were made by the African Development Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank on how to change the multilateral system, how to make sure that the governance is more inclusive. Let's work on that, and let's see if we can get some of these good suggestions in the system. I think we also talked about more blended finance. More blended finance is necessary if there's less finance from government sources, if ODA is going down. At the same time, let's make sure that the finance that is coming into more blended finance also goes to the goals that we have set for the Sustainable Development Goals, and does not go as a sort of subsidy for companies that want to work on extractivism in the Global South, which is a little bit what we see with the Global Gateway program that the European Union has started a couple of years ago. So it's important for us to look at it critically, but also make sure that we have certain goals. We have certain goals that we have set for 2030. There's only 5 years left. Let's make sure that the finance that we use is also used for those goals. And let's see if we can get more and other sources of financing if they do not come from government sources anymore. I also wanted to mention debt cancellation and the loss and damage funds. I think the ambassador also mentioned them, and they are in the text already. Let's make sure if we can, the small steps forwards that were taking place in the last few years, let's make sure if we can push a little bit more on them, but also get all countries on board when it comes to working on the debt, because of course it's not only those that were traditionally funding, but also new countries, especially China, that has been working closely with countries in the Global South on large projects and given large loans, which are often very difficult for those countries to comply with. So let's see if we can work on this issue also together. And finally, on a positive note, maybe the most important is to make sure that civil society is heard, civil society in Europe, but also civil society in the Global South. Some of you are representing organizations in the Global South. I heard some really good stories already today. The people that are the ones that in the end are benefiting or maybe are troubled by the actions that we have, those are the ones that we need to hear. And that's something at least that we are prepared and preparing to do towards this summer, towards Sevilla, but also afterwards, because it's the most important, I think, to talk to those that are in the end the ones benefiting, and they are the ones that know best how we can improve this system and how we can make sure that maybe some of the Sustainable Development Goals in 5 years will be reached. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marit. We're really happy to have you here. And we're also extremely happy to have our next speaker here. We've been trying for a long time to stress that economic and finance issues are not just boring numbers, it's a human rights fight. And we're not alone in that fight. Extremely glad to give the floor to our very, very special independent expert on foreign debt and other financial obligations and human rights. Atiya, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to start with what success looks like for me. And I am going to be extremely utopian because I really think we need to reach for the stars and then see what drops on the ground. So I would like to see us go beyond the deadlock in Addis and actually create an international financial architecture which has an institution that is principles-based, that has legitimate decision-making processes, that is accepted by all member states in the world, and very importantly, that every single financial decision made in that block, and I will break the block down, is a decision which puts the human being at the center of it. And that includes a rating agency that is not controlled by private companies, as it is right now. It includes a dispute settlement arm so that countries have somewhere to go to when they have financial disputes, that there is a space to go to for decisions on taxation and negotiations on taxation, so that we're not battling it out on a bilateral basis and no one knows what happens, that there is a space where debtor countries can go and talk to each other so that similar countries can get similar negotiations, and not what we have right now, which is each country does whatever it can with whichever negotiating arm it's dealing with diverse interest rates, random repayment schedules, whether it is a private debt or a public debt. And at the same time, while we're having all of these conversations, that there is a currency regulation space that takes away the power that is placed into a single country because we are using the currency of what we call hard currencies, for example, or one country, which means that you cannot put in unilateral sanctions or coercive measures, that there is a space for all things finance. This is my dream. We have 5 months. So now, reality bites, and I have maybe 3 minutes left. So for me, it's about the challenges, and I keep coming back to a principle-based approach. So I will tell you what member states have been telling me, that they see double standards, that they see dishonesty, and they see hypocrisy in the way member states are behaving across the world. So they will have one position on a certain issue, but a completely almost schizophrenic thinking in another issue. There needs to be coherence, there needs to be a direction that you can see a country following. And unfortunately, you actually cannot see a single direction very often. So that's what I would like to see. I would like Spain to make sure that happens. Spain is, oh please, I'm not creating any diplomatic incidents. This is my mandate I have to worry about periodically. But as the host member, there is always so much responsibility on the particular country. And I would like there to be a language and a narrative that is pushed forward coherently across all your staff, no matter whom they are speaking to, so that the language is one of what are we putting center and focus, and how do we make sure these negotiations are taking place in this principled-based diplomatic system. For me, that would be really important. The other thing I would like to have is a conversation around pledges and the need to honor pledges. Whether we talk about the loss and damage fund, or we talk about the climate fund, we talk about any kind of reparations or court cases where finances have been requested or required, let's have countries in law, we say you must come to the table with clean hands. Let's come to the table with clean hands. I'd like member states to honor those pledges. I was deeply, deeply disappointed by Baku. I know many felt that there was good and bad, but for me, in this digital world where the press of a button will release funding, that's the world we're living in. So the failure to honor a pledge is counting seconds. We are not counting regulatory changes in a country. Press the button and countries should honor pledges. So I would hope in the run-up to the discussions that there is a push to get member states around the world to say, you're coming to FFD, this is a financing conversation. All the pledges you've made, please honor them. Let's take them forward. That's what I would like to see. The Pact of the Future and the Declaration on Intergenerational Responsibility from a financial perspective I feel is like a time bomb. We are talking about how to protect different generations, but we have, unfortunately, we are able to place the responsibility of the financial mess we're in this older generation, who are the same ones who are coming into this intergenerational conversation and expecting us to be supportive of them. And I think we need to be very understanding that they also have a responsibility to help us change, which now takes me to the human rights part of the conversation, which is what I was supposed to be talking about. Well, I will tell you, there's blood on the budget lines. There are people's lives lost because of decisions we make on finance. There are babies that die because of finance, because parents never got maternity care. There is a reality on the ground on all of this semi-dry financial conversation I'm having. And in October of last year, I presented a report to the General Assembly on what I call the life cycle approach, which is basically look at the development of a child, see their development markers, see the kind of financial support different countries provide in these different points in time. And at the end of it, remember that 25 years later, this is the same human being you're expecting to pay taxes, to repay debt. And if we don't make sure that we are taking care of that human being, then there will be a person who has not had good nutrition or good education or any kind of support system, who is then the one expected to now pay off not only taxes, but also to help pay off debt taken on by previous generations. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Atiya. And we now go to the last two speakers on the panel, of which I would say that one of the best parts about our jobs is that we get to work with amazing people in the same fight around the world. And in Eurodad, we're very, very lucky to have sister organizations around the world. And so next speaker is from our sisters in Latindad. We're very, very happy to have you here, Patricia. And Patricia will speak in Spanish. So now is the time if you have the translation.
Thank you, Tobe. I think I might wait for everyone to kindly use your headsets. Bien, entre los factores importantes para nosotras está el multilateralismo. Y el multilateralismo en el sentido de que es necesario que el proceso de financiamiento para el desarrollo fortalezca el multilateralismo, estableciendo procesos en el marco de Naciones Unidas. Ya tenemos una convención marco sobre tributación internacional que está en camino, pero también hay ya demandas sobre una convención marco en deuda soberana, una convención marco en cooperación al desarrollo. Y esto es importante dentro de lo que es la reforma de la arquitectura financiera. Cada vez mayor número de delegados dentro de Naciones Unidas está hablando y pidiendo una reforma a la arquitectura financiera internacional. ¿Qué significa esto? Es un rompecabezas de distintas partes clave que tienen que encajar muy bien y además al mismo tiempo. Solo una o dos no sirven. El documento, el borrador cero del financiamiento para el desarrollo actualmente va tomando en algunos sentidos esta forma, pero aún no llega ahí. Entonces, es muy ambicioso hablar de tener tantas convenciones marco, podrían decirse, ¿no? Al mismo tiempo. Y es ambicioso, pero el contexto lo requiere. No es una necesidad ahora, sino ya es un deber, porque se necesita una reforma sistémica ahora. Sí, realmente hay esta voluntad de cambiar el curso. Estamos viendo que ya los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible tienen una implementación tan baja del 17%, y como decían, ya estamos en el 2025. Entonces, si se quiere cambiar el curso, realmente se tienen que tomar acciones distintas. Hay un buen diagnóstico en el borrador cero sobre cuán mal está la situación. Y entonces la pregunta es si luego las propuestas realmente son una respuesta con ese nivel de preocupación respecto a ese diagnóstico que hemos leído. Un segundo factor para mí, y ya también lo han mencionado, es la deuda. La deuda es uno de los temas que está entre los primeros puntos de agenda en este proceso de financiamiento para el desarrollo. Y es un endeudamiento que no solamente es un círculo vicioso, sino es una espiral que va creciendo cada vez más. Es importante que en el proceso se está hablando ya de que es un problema de países en desarrollo. Ya no es solamente de países de ingreso bajo, sino también de ingreso medio. Pero es muy importante que en las soluciones que veamos a la deuda, dejemos de lado el business as usual. ¿Y a qué me refiero con esto? Y en mi país, y creo que en varios países hispanohablantes, está el dicho de más vale lo viejo conocido que lo nuevo por conocer. Y entonces es el sentimiento que por lo menos yo tengo respecto al G20 Common Framework, ¿no? Al marco común del G20. Es un proceso que falló, que son varios años en los que realmente no se ven los resultados, pero se sigue manteniendo, es decir, ha tenido evaluaciones, se ve que se pueda ajustar un poco acá, un poco allá, pero tiene un problema de origen, de concepción, y es que está centrado en los intereses del acreedor. Entonces, bajo ese problema de origen, no va a funcionar. Y entonces puede ser un boomerang a este proceso de financiamiento para el desarrollo, cuando de aquí a 10 años veamos que continúa en el mismo sendero. El mismo borrador cero menciona que no hay efectivamente un sistema de deuda, que el proceso ad hoc no está cumpliendo los propósitos, pero seguimos manteniendo de todas maneras lo que ahora tenemos. Entonces creo que eso es importante considerarlo. Y en ese sentido es muy importante dentro de toda esta reforma, la reforma de la arquitectura de la deuda, con una mirada de un impacto que pueda ser sostenible en el mediano y largo plazo, es decir, no con políticas que tengan impacto de corto plazo y después nuevamente tengamos que buscar nuevas medidas en los siguientes años. En este sentido, el poder tener como uno de los resultados una convención marco sobre deuda es muy importante y tiene que pasar, ¿no? Si no pasa ahora, tendrá que pasar en algún momento. El tema es que esta es la oportunidad, es ahora cuando podría iniciarse. No es que se va a implementar este año, pero ya tener un primer, abrir las puertas y que se pueda tener los primeros pasos de implementación, realmente sería muy importante, ¿no? Es decir, pues quienes estuvieron en el FfD4 solucionaron el tema de la deuda, entonces sería un hito, ¿no? Un tercer factor importante que pienso que es importante compartirlo, hay que tener cuidado con la apuesta tan fuerte por el sector privado. Y el sector privado, hablando del sector privado del gran capital, está de alguna manera presente en distintas fuentes de financiamiento que vemos en el financiamiento para el desarrollo. Sin embargo, también hay que estar consciente de los riesgos, es decir, ya en Addis Ababa teníamos el From Billions to Trillions, si no lo digo en español porque son tantos ceros que uno ya se pierde, pero no se cumplió. Entonces, ¿qué tiene que pasar ahora para que esa brecha financiera realmente se cierre con el sector privado? O reducir más el riesgo de nuestros proyectos públicos, o sea, mayor de-risking, incorporar al sector privado, por ejemplo, en intermediarios privados, en los canjes de deuda, donde donde hay un riesgo, no está claro finalmente cuánto realmente se beneficia a cada país deudor, y por otro lado también ya hay ejemplos de impactos negativos sobre las comunidades con los actuales mecanismos o con la estructura financiera actual de los canjes de deuda. Entonces hay que ser muy cuidadoso en esta apuesta con el sector privado, y hay otros ejemplos, ¿no? Los bancos multilaterales de desarrollo que también están promoviendo una mayor participación del sector privado, o apostar con la preciada ayuda oficial para el desarrollo, que hay proyectos que no se pueden financiar con otras fuentes y utilizarlo para garantizar la rentabilidad del sector privado. Entonces tiene que haber un equilibrio, y ese cuidado me parece que, y medir los riesgos es muy importante. El tercer factor que me parece importante es la voluntad política. Y tras Addis Abeba no tuvimos… En muchos casos no tuvimos el cómo serían los medios de implementación, de cuánto estamos hablando y cuándo, ¿no? Para cuándo nos estamos comprometiendo. Entonces es más difícil medir realmente en qué medida hubo un avance o no. En ese sentido, la voluntad política para tener realmente inclusive una redacción ambiciosa y un compromiso concreto sería muy importante, y como dice el título y todo el tema de esta conferencia, es la última oportunidad antes de la Agenda 2030, y estamos ya en el 2025. Y algunos me preguntan, ¿pero qué viene después de la Agenda 2030? La Agenda 2045 y así. Y yo pienso que no, porque además tenemos una crisis climática, una crisis de biodiversidad, donde estamos contra el reloj y el tiempo se acaba. Y por último, promover una renegociación, un proceso de negociación, que también lo mencionaba a Tía, un proceso justo. Y es que cuando en algunos momentos de negociación hay que ser muy cuidadosos con los esquemas o las metodologías que se utilizan, porque países pequeños, con delegaciones pequeñas, por ejemplo, como las mías, no pueden adaptarse a determinadas formas de negociación, y entonces están en desventaja. Y hay que garantizar que este proceso tenga una negociación justa. Y a la segunda pregunta de, bueno, ¿y qué pasa? Bueno, lo que pasaría si no se cumple con la ambición de este proceso es que no se podría garantizar el ejercicio de los derechos humanos, de los derechos económicos, sociales y culturales. No vamos a reducir las desigualdades, no vamos a reducir la pobreza, mucho menos erradicarla, y vamos a tener mayores crisis. En los últimos días hemos estado escuchando toda una lista de crisis que hacen a esta crisis múltiple, y van a haber más, ¿no? Por mencionar una de ellas, la crisis del cuidado y del sistema de reproducción social. Entonces van a ir aumentando más estas crisis, y para ello es importante, y también ya se decía en este panel, escuchar a las personas. Entonces valoramos mucho que estén acá y puedan conversar con nosotros, escucharnos, pero también somos de los privilegiados que tenemos voz, pero también además hay que hacer el esfuerzo, ¿no? Desde todas las delegaciones, de mirar las necesidades de estas personas que no tienen voz, pero que finalmente reciben los impactos, porque las políticas económicas globales que se deciden en el ámbito del financiamiento para el desarrollo parecen que están en la estratosfera, pero después van bajando a lo nacional, a lo local, y tienen un impacto directo sobre las personas. Y entonces, para terminar, pienso que es posible incluir un enfoque de justicia y de reparación en todas las fuentes de financiamiento al desarrollo, es decir, un enfoque de justicia económica, social, climática, de género, Yo diría, pero ¿y qué tiene que ver con determinar, qué tiene que ver con los derechos especiales de giro? Sí, hay una forma de buscar, de mirar el ángulo de justicia, y creo que eso sería un avance muy importante. Y finalmente, para cerrar, creo que es importante también el reconocimiento de que la comunidad internacional, la comunidad financiera internacional falló, porque el no dejar a nadie atrás no se está cumpliendo y no se va a cumplir. De hecho, ya se ha dejado a millones atrás y cada vez a un paso más rápido y cada vez más lejos de quienes están adelante, concentrando la riqueza. Entonces, creo que no estamos en el momento, no podemos darnos el lujo de aferrarnos a políticas pasadas que vemos que no funcionan. Creo que es muy importante cambiar ese chip y tener realmente un nivel de ambición más grande para tener impactos que sean sostenibles en el largo plazo. No solamente pensando en nosotros, sino también en el impacto hacia las futuras generaciones. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Patricia. The last speaker really needs no introduction. Stefano Prato, Director for Society for International Development and one of the facilitators of the civil society group in FfD. I would just say, I think there are colleagues, and then there are friends, and then there's that odd group of people that were sitting and crying together on the floor in Addis when we lost the tax paragraph. There is this weird, when you've been on the front line together, you've suffered a very, very strange joint faith. Who would have thought that so many of us, I'm looking at you, that so many of us would still be here 10 years later. It's so nice that you're still leading the fight, Stefano. And we heard some comments on the zero draft, and there was also a request for a very, very top-line reminder of what is this battle FfD about? Is it about asking for some pledges and donations, or is it about something more fundamental? So please, what do we need in Sevilla?
Thanks so much, Tove, and also for reminding the Addis days. And there's Aldo standing there, so I'm feeling like I'm being watched in what I say, you know, and with a pen, with a red pen, you know, in case I say the right things or the wrong ones. But a long journey, indeed, until this point, including by attempting to smuggle into the UN a global tax body and other funny moments. No, let me zoom in on FfD4. It is definitely a critical battle. We are at a juncture in which we've learned also after 20 plus years of FfD that this process is not going to be about winning any nice language. Because when it comes to economic governance, nice paragraphs, adding in nice words, even having a very nice formulation, unfortunately, it doesn't lead very far. Because on each of those paragraphs, there is a web of practices, agreements, and more that will immediately override it in a usual normative hierarchies in which those, unfortunately, comes much earlier than any soft agreement. So first of all, unfortunately, financing for development is a bad name. I think Wangari this morning reminded us in plenary, right? Because it evokes this idea of going to a place in which you find money to pay for things. Unfortunately, that's not what FfD has been from the very beginning, has been a locus for struggle to reorient, reform, redesign the international financial architecture. And everyone speaks about this international financial architecture. I have the impression that it's on everyone's mouth, but nobody knows what it is. You know? And I would say, in a bit of a simplification, that the international financial architecture is based on three major components: normative frameworks within international law, decision-making spaces, and an ecosystem of institutions. And that's precisely where the three big shifts that we hope will come from FfD4 are coming from. The first one is a shift from a power-based ruling of the global economy to a rule-based within international law system. And you'll be surprised how weak international law is when it comes to the global economy. We have the impression that everything is rooted, into law. It isn't actually. It's rooted into practices and power dynamics that few impose on everyone else in a typical colonial, feudal, imperial manner. So the big shift is for FfD4 to be a moment in which we transition away from that power system into a rule-based system. And this means agreeing clearly the initiation of three major normative processes in international law. The first one, we have it already, is the one for a UN Framework Convention on Tax. But we need to defend its integrity, defend its comprehensiveness. The second, Patricia just explained it, a UN Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt. And the third one is, again, a UN Convention on International Development Cooperation. Three important pieces that will start building up international law in the way in which we govern the global economy. Now, people say, oh gosh, three conventions at the same time, that's big. No. Think back, 1992, Rio starts three major conventions on climate, on biodiversity, on the certification. So we want Sevilla to be another Rio moment for international finance, in which we really start shifting away from power into international law, and therefore into clear processes to negotiate these conventions. Some of you are thinking, oh gosh, this guy has a good pusher. I actually want the same stuff. It's actually feasible. The tax convention is already on the way. The debt convention is very clearly demanded from the Africa Group, from Pakistan, from Cuba, from the Organization of Small Island States. So there is a clear demand for that. And so for international development cooperation, maybe the Global South may not call it convention yet. Hopefully they'll soon do that. But they're calling for the same thing, for clear rules and decision-making spaces under the UN. Okay? So this is the first big shift, from power to normative framework in international law. The second one is to have a clear shift towards the democratization of governance, and therefore shifting away from the exclusive power developed countries and the institutions they command and control into a UN-based process. These three conventions already will be a massive step in that direction, because they will supposedly establish convention of the parties under the UN procedure and protocol, exactly as all other conventions. But we need to go one step beyond that. Why? Because these three conventions, as important as they are, they leave out two important dimensions of the global economy, which unfortunately are the driving ones: trade and finance. Now, the Monterrey consensus was very clear in the need of democratizing trade and initiating a process of regulation of monetary and financial systems. This has been eroded, on one hand, by the appropriation of the G20 of the finance agenda and the appropriation of the WTO of the trade agenda. Well, FfD4 is an opportunity to reclaim that those institutions do not have the legitimacy to actually regulate this area. On trade, an important battle will be to agree on a multilateral consensus to eliminate investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms, and therefore reaffirm the centrality of policy space for governments to pursue public goals. And that, I think, would be a massive step, along with the banning, the termination of unilateral sanctions, including those organized in the name of climate. On finance, I think it's going to be a longer journey, right? But we have three important Trojan horses that we are campaigning for. The first one is the regulation of credit rating agencies. And I think having a clear supervisory mechanism for credit rating agencies I think is called honestly by all parties. It's just a matter of, agreeing and moving forward with that. The other two pieces are more complicated, but is a global consensus on capital account management. If you can't even regulate what comes in and out, what control do you have? What sovereignty do you have on your monetary and financial system? And lastly, the initiation on a process to regulate the asset management industry, basically the Wild West of global finance, and begin to bring global finance back into democratic accountability. Again, it sounds very far distant, but they're actually feasible because there's many governments that are calling for this. And who are the blockers? Well, we're close geographically, and that's exactly what we need to do. Start calling out who is opposing and blocking the democratization of governance. The third major shift, and there I stop, is that, okay, you have normative frameworks, you have a shifting of the barycenter of decision-making into a UN-centered space, but lastly, you also need to review the ecosystem of international financial institutions. And the big shift here is to move away from quotas and dollar-based system into that continue leading towards hegemony, right? The hegemonic expansion of the bank, for instance, or hegemonic expansion of the IMF mandate, even beyond its article of association. And rather, bring this system back into democratic control and transform it into a much more plural, much more diversified, at different levels, global, regional, and national ecosystem of institutions that is really able to support a sustainable development pathway. That's probably the most complicated ones because these institutions have massive power, but the reality is that they keep on failing. So it's not that they can present a track record in which they say, well, yeah, maybe our governance isn't best, but look at what we've done. Well, if we can only start, Unfortunately, they are at the core of many of the problems that we are currently fighting with, and therefore they have no legitimacy of offering solutions to the problems that they have themselves generated, and they have no credibility of reforming themselves. So it's time to impose a UN-centered revision of that ecosystem. So these are the big demands for FfD4, what makes it a success. Now, of course, what's the risk if this doesn't happen? I don't want to be catastrophic here, but the reality is that in today's world, when reformism fails, you basically end up with radical resistance. And I think we are very, very close to the point in which if no solutions begin to alter today's circumstances, that radical resistance may become really nasty. Because when people are against a wall, then at some point they have nothing to lose. And I think it's important for the international community to recognize that whatever resilience, which is a nice name to mean you're on your own, they may have relied upon is now completely eroded. So we are pretty much at the finish line. And I think that's the big risk if FfD4 fails.
Thank you so much. That was the panel. Now it's over to all of you with comments and questions. We have 20 minutes left. Oh, here's another Addis dinosaur. Please, Emilia, so good to have you here.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to mention the concern of the feminist movement of what is expected in Addis, in Sevilla, because the Addis Ababa Action Agenda does include a reference of women's human rights in operative language. Of all of the agreements that were negotiated in 2015, and I include Habitat, was in 2016, it was a package, a global package. of all of those documents, there is no reference to women's human rights. There was a huge pushback, and yet in the FFD agenda, it was the only possibility to access women's human rights, despite even in the SDGs, the rejection of language on human rights, and that was the only, in SDG 4, there was only a mandate on gender equality and women's empowerment. The FFD agenda has operative language on human rights. And so when we are told that there is a pushback and that there is no consensus and therefore it has to be left out of the agenda, it seems like the governments are in agreement that human rights are contentious, and they're not. They're a mandate. There is international multilateral system built upon the human rights framework. So when even so-called progressive countries accept that premise that human rights are contentious, then what is not contentious? And then in what can we agree? If there is a whole institutional building of in different manners on the human rights framework, and especially I just want to emphasize that to us, the feminist agenda is as structural as the institutional transformation that the panelists, our colleagues are talking about. There is no difference between transforming the global financial architecture, because that is the monetized economy, as opposed to the feminist agenda that is talking about the non-monetized economy, all of the social reproduction that is upholding and subsidizing the rest of life. So to us, it is critical not only to have references on gender, on women, we need to have women's human rights, because that is the operational mandate for governments to implement everything else that will be possibly done at the regional and at the national level. And globally, that would be a signal that the feminist agenda is not being treated, or the women's agenda is not treated as a micro agenda for micro loans and whatever. It is a macro challenge. It has to do with the subsidy that women are providing, and therefore it would be the macro recognition that it already has in Addis. So just really an invitation to say that is a very low-hanging fruit in the sense that it's already there. It's a great language. It has to be pulled. It has to be defended, and it has to remain until the final end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emilia. You don't have to be an Addis veteran to speak. Please, everyone, chip in. We're also very happy to have a lot of new people here. Let's see, we have here and any other. All right, you think of it. We'll be passing the mic around to more questions. First, I think. It's okay. Yes, please.
Okay,
Jane.
thank you so much. I'm Jane Narunga from Siatini. We are based in Uganda. And thanks to the panelists. I just wanted to add on something on trade, in addition to what Stefano has raised. The biggest challenge facing our countries in the South is the issue of commodity dependence. We export raw commodities, coffee, tea, cocoa, and we import finished products. We are running a trade deficit every day. So we need policy space and flexibility in trade laws, in finance, to be able to add value, to be able to industrialize. I think the issue to be put on the table is the issue of structural transformation of the economies of the southern countries. We need to industrialize. We need to create jobs, especially for our young people, so that everybody can be able to live in dignity. We need to raise incomes sustainably at household level and also at national level. I just want to remind you that we had a HIPIC initiative, our debts were forgiven. We are back in our situation because we are not able to generate resources internally. For me, when I look at the FFD, when it comes to finance, it's about resources coming from outside, putting countries on a drip, which can't work. We need to generate our resources internally. And finance has to be linked to the real sector, to the real economic sector, to agriculture, to industry. My worry is that we are going to continue the dependence, the commodity dependence when it comes to the critical minerals. And I see it in Africa, more minerals are coming out. So we need to rethink. And for me, I think structural transformation of the economies of the South has to be on the table. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I don't know, it's working. So thanks a lot for the panel. I found it super interesting. And following a little bit what Stefano was saying, and it was more directed to Marit and Monica, is after we've discussing those couple of days around how key it is to reform the architecture and go to really tackle and the system and how the economic system works and the international finance architecture works. Trying to see, and also take into account how COP29 went and how a little bit a bad agreement from our point of view was pushed for this global south to agree on and to better have that no agreement, and seeing how the global north and the European Union were not ambitious enough and we were a little bit disappointed. So looking into that, what do you think we can do from civil society to have or to push European Union countries and European Union as a bloc, not to confirm, not to stay happy with the reform approach and to ask for IMF and the World Bank to become better or more efficient, and really we still have 5 months to go, and just to know if you have any suggestions, and also if you can also help us to have the European Union bloc as a champion for this reform and not just stay what is included now in the zero draft. So maybe I'm very naive, but it will be great to hear from you.
Hello. Hi. Hi, I'm Maria. I'm working on the Jubilee 2025 debt campaign this year. I think you made a really powerful point, Stefano, around, if reformism fails, you get radical resistance. And now in the geopolitical context of Trump having been re-elected and the US not being a champion of the kind of existing multilateral system in the way it has been, I wonder to what degree you think using that framing when speaking to European governments around if you don't substantially rethink in the international financial system, then multilateralism will fail. And in the absence of the US having any kind of progressive agenda on this, European countries need to step up. That's one question. And the second question is, do you think that there is any possibility or promise of a renewed effort for a kind of debtor club, for debtor countries to come together and form a bloc and threaten to default collectively as a bloc, or maybe something less radical than that? But yeah, is there any prospect for that?
Great. Now we go to one online question, and then we have 2, 3 questions, 4 questions on the other side of the room, 5, and then we have to stop. Very good.
Thank you. Yeah, there's about 40 people following online, so that's pretty good. This question is from Daniela Brandt from the International Refugee Committee in Germany, and it's for Monica. Thank you very much for centering around developing countries. Could you please elaborate whether also fragile and conflict-affected countries are given special consideration or should be given special consideration? And also for Marit, could you please tell us a bit more about the European Parliament's report's timeline and whether there will be CSO engagement opportunities? So 2 very concrete questions.
Excellent. Now we do the questions over here, and then one more, and then we go back to the panel.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Kate. I work at Oxfam. So a question which is kind of bouncing off what Stefano said about the Bretton Woods institutions not really having the credibility or the success stories or the track record to be able to kind of claim that what they're doing is working or that it has a legitimate basis. I agree, but unfortunately we see this constantly, we see this kind of epistemic kind of disjuncture where the knowledge, you know, many of us in this room have produced all sorts of like evidence and knowledge about devastating impacts of the policies and practices of the Bretton Woods institutions. However, the Bretton Woods institutions have their own set of success metrics and their own set of evidence that they claim tells a story of success. And there's also this question of who has the authority to speak. And I often find that like when we're talking with politicians or MPs about this question, they tend to believe the lines of the IFIs much more than they believe the very hard-fought evidence of civil society. So a question especially to Marit and to Monica about how do you suggest we as CSOs, how can we better educate and convince your colleagues about the kind of real story about the impact of these institutions and the impact that their policies and practices are having?
David Archer from ActionAid. I think if we go back to the very beginning of this conference and Mariama saying, oh look, let's all be anticipating some failure at the end of the year, I think it's actually quite an important and refreshing sort of, I mean, I'm an irrational optimist, but I think we have to recognise whatever happens, we're not going to be entirely happy with what comes out. We might get some victories and we should fight as hard as we can to get some victories from the text, both internal negotiations and external pressure. But I think in a way, you know, in terms of what the consequences for us, the most important thing we need to do over this period is to build the connections between the different movements and build that common agenda and the confidence that we have in putting forward a common agenda that connects the economic justice, the climate justice, the feminist alternatives, the public services, the social protection. So we are working with a stronger united voice at a national level in every country, especially in the global south, because I think that in the end, the pressure for reform of a corrupted colonial economic system will have to come from the south. And that's what we need to start working to build in as strong a way as we possibly can. So let's recognize, do what we can to get some successes, do what we can to isolate Trump. If he's going to be isolationist, let's isolate him. But let's really work on building, anticipating we're not going to get everything we want, but if we can build the strength of a united movement, we will find other ways to do it. The FfD is not the only space to win some of these battles. As I think I mentioned on the first day, I think the UN Framework Convention on Tax was won at UNGA and didn't need an FfD to do it. There are other spaces and other battles we can win. The most important thing is the united movement to be able to drive that.
Thank you. I'm building a little bit on this. I'm Sofia with the Green Economy Coalition. I think we really need to avoid this feeling that, and you mentioned in different directions, and the idea of the 3 conventions, that is great, and climate is important, but in the Elements paper it's only mentioned in the context of development finance. So ODA is not enough. And in some cases we are seeing also this backlash against green policies, the European Green Deal seen as neo-colonialism, and so on and so forth. And there is a risk that there is this tension between development finance and climate finance, where we should avoid doing that and building on the societal demand from Global South and from Europeans that we really need to advance the agenda, and climate finance should be seen as an engine for development, not as something that is competing. So that we mainstream climate, and there are risks that we are not maybe mainstreaming climate into new conventions that might be coming. So how to work better together and cooperate better with the Global South as well. Thank you.
No worries. Hi, I'm Sylvain. I work for Human Rights Watch. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given where I work, I would like to really much second the point Emilia made on the importance of women's rights and human rights more generally. And I would like to reflect also why, the point exactly you made, why a few years ago it was pretty normal to have women's rights and human rights in this kind of text. And now it seems that we have to give up to the idea that we don't hide anymore in a text like this one. There's a range of reasons, geopolitics has changed, but I think one of the key reasons is that countries, like all the anti-feminist countries, the Saudi Arabia and Milei of this world, it's not like they changed position. They were always against women's rights. But nowadays, it's much easier for them to rally others because there's just a sense of tiredness against human rights. And I think this is largely due to the fact that, in particular, northern governments have used human rights in a very limited way as a way to place conditionalities to the south, say, I won't give you this unless you respect rights. And that's been the dominant misuse, corruption of the term of human rights by mostly global north governments for decades. And so that's valid in everything, including like European Parliament report and resolution. It's not common that you call for, I won't do this unless human rights are met. And the human rights that we pick. So you don't care about the right to health or education too much, or not you personally, but in general, global north governments. But it's unless like the right to freedom of speech is respected, I won't give you this. And I pick the rights I care about. And that's obviously a corruption of the concept, and that's leading to its progressive erosion. And it's leading, then we end up in situations right now where women's rights become controversial, not because there's more opposition to women's rights as much as because it's much easier for all the, Milei and Saudi Arabia and others to rally others that are easily coming on. So I think one solution would be to reflect more generally in using carefully human rights, not placing as conditionalities in a set of policies because it impacts every negotiation. And in this text, especially in the FfD text, I think it'd be very important that human rights are not placed just as a barrier, as a limitation, but as an enabler. So when we ask for tax, well, human rights demand tax. Tax is a human rights obligation. Human rights is not a limitation to tax, it is a requirement. And so we should position human rights carefully in the text where possible. It doesn't have to be many places, but 3 or 4 places where women's rights and human rights are a requirement for the changes we're asking for, not a barrier and limitation to it. Otherwise, we are killing human rights, and when we're killing human rights, we're also killing the idea that there's a rule of law. That is one of the points we're trying to build, and it's very dangerous. I really want to insist how risky the game global north countries are playing by misusing, I think, international law to place it as a barrier rather than an enabler.
Yeah, I'm Bodo from Global Policy Forum. Perhaps a few remarks on the procedural dimension. I mean, CSOs were, I think, the first ones to push for FfD4 to be convened. And the fact that it's convened is already a success for us. I think the situation we were facing 3 years ago is basically we had the G20 in the driver's seat of global economic governance. And of course, G20 is a place where most countries do not have a seat at the table. And on the other hand, we had very weak structures at the United Nations, basically only the financing for development forums of the ECOSOC and the regular work of the second committee, the Economic and Social Affairs Committee. And we wanted to have a place where basically a fully inclusive space, but on a very much higher political level and much more debate on economic and financial policies at the United Nations. And this is actually happening now. I mean, when I look at, starting with the Summit of the Future last year, now the PrepComs and the FfD4 Conference, and also probably moving into the World Social Summit in September. And I'm monitoring UN policies in this area for 15, 20 years now. I've never seen so many debates and milestones at the UN level on financial policy debates. So basically this is, I think, this is what we already achieved, that we basically moved a discussion, policy discussion on financial and economic affairs away a little bit from G20 to the United Nations, where we can discuss them in a fully inclusive format. So that's on the successes. Then let me quickly say a few things on the risks. I mean, FfD4 will result in a non-binding outcome document. I mean, it's not enforceable. It's basically a UN General Assembly resolution. They're not legally binding. So, Monica, Julie, it's actually you who says when we meet that Sevilla should not end in Sevilla. Sevilla needs to start in Sevilla. So, no matter how good the language in this outcome document is, there's no guarantee that anything is going to be implemented unless somebody picks it up after Sevilla and makes sure that this happens. I mean, when you look at the zero draft, you already find a few elements which have been agreed at other UN conferences many years ago, and they put them again in the outcome document because nothing happened after these UN conferences. Well, and on the other hand, you have, Tobe was just complaining about the situation in Addis. I mean, we had very weak language on the tax body. I think it was like tax cooperation needs to be universal in scope or so. But then you had a few people pushing, and you had a few countries pushing, you had CSOs pushing over a decade, and then it evolved into what is now the process on the Framework Convention for International Tax Cooperation. That shows you that, I mean, such a conference can trigger something, but there's no guarantee. I mean, unless, I mean, if we achieve something in Sevilla, but we don't continue to push after Sevilla, we're going to be in a big mess. So this just to say, so that's just to say that, I mean, we should not go home after and dissolve everything after Sevilla, but this is a key milestone. It's the biggest political agreement at the United Nations level on these issues for a decade. But yeah, I mean, implementation depends on us basically continue pushing after the game is over.
Excellent. We are actually 1 minute over time. I'm going to have to ask for your forgiveness. We're going to run over time because this panel is too interesting to let them go, and there are so many questions. We should allow them to answer. We've had a lot of input, so please, panel, we have to be a bit brief, but at the same time, we're actually really keen to hear your thoughts. And Monica, you've become very popular, so what do you think about all the questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much for these reflections. It's really good for us to listen to, no? Because sometimes we don't have the opportunity to be in this kind of important conversation. So I really appreciate very much your very insightful, really reflections and ideas and proposals, no? I will refer to some questions because I think other panelists could complement, and there were clear questions for us. I think one was on a civil society role, no? What to do more better, and so I think that the message is clear, no? You have to keep going, keep advocating. You have to raise your voice because you are the voice of conscience. And Boro told me now that the conference was convened because also you were there, and we know that you have been very important in this agenda and with very important proposals. But the thing is try to influence, no? It's not just to advocate for advocating, but for try to influence, as you mentioned, no? The European Union. We will be negotiating within the European Union, so it's very important for the European Union to have a high level of ambition and to be champion of the debt, of the reform of the architecture, the financial architecture. And I think it's important to remind all of us, no, and to remind capitals in Europe, but I think it's also important to remind societies in Europe, as our Marit was telling, no, the context is not the easiest one. So that development, human development is really a human aspiration, no? We really, it's the condition sine qua non for stable and inclusive societies, and this is also at stake in Europe. So I think that they have to learn, our societies in Europe, that this is something that also involves them as society. But I think it's also important to advocate with capitals in developing countries, no, and also to make the case for finance ministries, because this, as you mentioned, some of them, and you know perfectly, this is also key questions for ministries of finance, and they have to be involved, no? So I think this is just some tips. Not a solution, but other question on the fragile context. Okay, we saw that the CEDAW draft cover better these countries in very special conflict, fragile situation, and we, as Spain, were advocating, no, to take into account this kind of problems that they are facing and not to be left behind. And so we are really trying also to cover them and to try to complement, you know, financing for this more humanitarian context with developing finance. And I don't know on the risk, no, I totally agree with you mentioned, but also for us is key the mechanism, the follow-up mechanism, and this is quite a difference because coming back to Addis Ababa Action Agenda, we had a very nice text, very rich with many things you mentioned, big initiatives, but we didn't manage to deliver and to owe our pledges, no, as Aya was telling us. So I think it will be important to have this reinforced mechanism and to make us accountable for the commitments we will try to achieve in Sevilla. And I will stop here.
Thank you. Let's go the whole row. So Patricia, over to you.
Hi. Well, I don't know if you have your headsets, so probably I will just run in English. So I would like to take the Debtors Club question because the zero draft actually opens, I say it opens the window for a sort of coordination between borrowers, and that's an interesting point. And how this was born, it was born in Latin America several years ago because there was a creditors club, the London club, the Paris club, and there was not a space where borrower countries could actually coordinate and have a common position. So that's still a challenge. It would be interesting that it happens because in the current context, our governments and our countries are frightened just to have a bad image when it comes to have access to international markets. And this is one of the main key issues that refrain our countries to have another step further. But if we have another space where all countries are sitting at the same table, discussing and making decisions all together about new rules on debt architecture, then this is also a way to include all borrower countries at the same table. So I think we need to combine that. And I would like to also address the issue about the tension between FFD and climate. And climate has an important point within the FFD. It is part of the zero draft. But my concern will be that it doesn't allow to lower the ambition in terms of financing commitments or to have a double registry like if commitments for climate would also merge with commitments with financing for development. And then I think it will be important for us to keep demanding the original commitments that developed countries made for both, for sustainable development and for climate. And we have been hearing the numbers, the figures, and it's really high. And if we add one to the other one, it's really high. But it's actually the financing need that our countries have. So, and my last point would be about what has been mentioning about this, how after Addis, and yeah, I was also there after the tax body was eliminated. And this has to have lessons learned for everyone, for us, for UN delegations. It took several years. We thought that day that we completely lost the battle. But then 9 years after, almost 10, we see, okay, it happened 9 years after that, but it did. So it has to be a lesson learned if we talk about a UN Convention framework on debt. Let's not wait 9 years. We need it now. Thank you.
Atia?
So thank you very much. As you can see, my dream's already coming true. We're taking giant steps, and I'm very happy to be here. So like others who were at Addis, and yeah, probably weren't crying in the same rooms, but nonetheless. There are a couple of issues, I think, that have been picked up that have happened in the past. So Patricia's already mentioned it. Egypt 2 years ago asked for a debtors club to be set up during COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. But the appetite of the member states, the political dynamics and the diplomacy around it meant it did actually happen. And I think it's important when we see a good idea that we separate it from the diplomatic byplay of the day and allow the idea to actually come up and be tested for what it is. And I think it's important to push that conversation. The second issue, which did not come up in your discussions, but I think also remains quite critical, there's something called the Chiang Mai Initiative, where you can actually have direct exchange of currencies that bypasses any other international currencies in trading. So it's not unheard of. These systems already exist and are in place, and so that could be really useful. But there's also the question about moving beyond the GDPs. And for that is UNDESA's multi-vulnerability index, which we haven't talked about. But SIDS and low-income countries all came together and redesigned a system where they felt was going to be better for them based on their vulnerabilities. And I think it's important to reinvigorate that, invigorate it, because it was just released about 1.5 years ago. But the one thing that gives me some concern is this conversation about absorption of commitments from one to the other. So development aid that is for national budgets is being moved into climate finance. We cannot have the same budget line just being shifted. Conversations must be around also fresh financing interactions. And I think that's something that we have to keep an eye on. And like many others in the room are saying, this isn't the only entry point. There are numerous entry points. And I think it's probably why we are where we are today, because even though we lost it during the FfD conversations on the setting up of a world tax body, clearly that conversation went into so many other spaces and then took so many other forms. So for me, this is about picking the ideas that are ready and then flying with them. But excited to see how everything works. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Atiya. And yes, Marit, you also
I got some
became
questions.
popular.
It's nice. It's good. The first one, the practical one, the easiest one is about the timeline. Next week, we expect the draft report of our colleague Gurens from Renew, who will make the draft report for the Development Committee. And then we have until the 20th of February to come up with proposals for amendments. So any one of you who has proposals for amendments or has ideas, my name, and if you Google it, you can find our email address in the European Parliament. Please do send us your information, and we will read it carefully and see if we can bring things together and bring them into our amendments or suggestions for the text. We will also try to organize with some CSOs in Brussels, organize a panel and see if we can share some of the knowledge, but this has to be done on short term because it has to be done before the 20th of February. And then we will start negotiating. This takes approximately a month and a half, and the voting will be first in May in the committee and in June in the plenary session. So there's 2 important moments before the 20th of February, but also during that negotiating period, possibly if some of you have come up with suggestions, we'll come back to you and to see how we can improve those suggestions. Then second issue I would like to respond on is now the European Union, the European bloc that used to be sort of a front runner and maybe more progressive than other blocs, and now seems to be moving backwards. And what can we, or sorry, I say we, what can civil society do? Yeah, I was part of you guys, so it feels a little, what can civil society do to be more effective in arguments with maybe people on the more conservative and on the right-wing side? I think what is, it's a strong argument, but it's a very difficult argument to come across with people from, especially from the more liberal right side, is that they are very concerned within Europe right now about migration. You know, migration is one of those issues. We don't want people from outside of the European Union to come here and so on. But the way in which we organize our trade and our international financial institutions is the root cause of migration, is the root cause of poverty, and is the root cause of why people have to move from one country to the next. And I think this is something that we have to argue much better, much stronger, and get across much stronger, because all the policies right now seem to be sort of penny wise, pound foolish, very short-termish. Whereas we see that these problems are, of course, much more long-term, and especially this, the way in which we are actually root causing poverty, more extreme poverty right now. The numbers are increasing. We were going down to, I think, 700 or 800 million people living in extreme poverty, and it's moving up again. And this is also because the way in which we behave in international trade. The reason why the Netherlands and Belgium are the largest cacao and chocolate producing countries. We don't have, the beans. The beans come from somewhere else, So there is really something there that needs to change, and we need to also open our markets not just to the beans, but also to the chocolate maybe being produced by countries like Ghana or Ivory Coast. So that's really something that we have to start working on. And then maybe finally on the human rights and on the women's rights, I do agree with you that there is a good level of hypocrisy in our politics right now when it comes to human rights. Some people previously mentioned Gaza, the way in which we have talked about human rights in Gaza, and maybe about human rights in other areas. There is a good level of hypocrisy. But the way in which women's rights are being threatened and the anti-gender movement that I mentioned before is of a different level. Because this is a really big group of organizations, of countries who are extremely conservative, religiously conservative, but also traditionalist conservative, and they are promoting families, family values, patriarchal family values with fathers, men in the lead, mothers as producing kids, sorry to put it that way, but this is really the way in which it is being seen and promoted, and it's done in a very subtle way also. It's not just in politics, but it's also in, look in your social media. Look in how Instagram, if you get into the bubble, all of a sudden feeds you with how nice it is to be a young woman and have 5 children and a husband that takes care of you. And this really is much bigger than we think it is. This is really a pushback on women's rights back to the 1960s, back to the 1950s. And we really have to, it's not just hypocrisy, it's much more than that. And I think this is something that we really have to fight back upon and really make sure that all these words do matter. It's not just about gender, it's not just about women's rights, it's not just about queer rights. We see in Italy that the second parent of a gay couple is being scratched out of the birth certificate of children. It is happening already, so make sure that we don't fall asleep with this, really don't make it a minor issue. It's a big issue. Fight for gender rights and fight for equal rights. Thank you. Yeah.
If you're speaking last, always sit far away from the moderator. This is just a fundamental rule of panels. So 3 major points. The first one, of course, how can we not have a thought on our Bretton Woods institutions? Katie is right, but the Bretton Woods institutions had a fantastic capacity of absorbing all our critiques, all our reports, all our contestation, and turn it into embellishment of their own framework. In fact, I used to say that we have been running a cost-free beauty clinic for Bretton Woods institutions because they've actually used everything we've done to simply pretend they are much better, but keep on doing the same things. Now, in the FfD process, normally they immediately claim all sorts of reform agenda. Everything they haven't done in the last 80 years, they will claim they can do in the next 2 weeks. So I think it's important to scale up contestation. Scaling up contestation against Bretton Woods institutions is instrumental to getting certain agreement within the FfD process. So that's my first point. The second point is just, it's true, FfD4 is not the beginning and the end of everything. There are many other things. But let's be clear why the UN is important. It's not about choosing the best horse. It's about choosing the best turf for us, for our struggle. The UN is the only space that has jurisdiction. If we want normative framework, we can only agree them there. It's democratic. It's not free of power asymmetries, but at least it's democratic in character. It is developmental and cannot fail to be based on human rights, women's rights, and is the best turf where we can discuss reparative justice. And we have a right to participate, right? At least in theory. So it's essential to remind us that our struggle has that as a critical turf. It may not be FfD4, but it's still UN-centered. Now, it's true what Bodo says, a lot of time, we spend a lot of energy in renegotiating language. That's the reason why the best follow-up mechanisms for Sevilla is having clear, actionable agreements. Basically, things that need to be initiated the morning after. Because the problem we had with follow-ups is that they always consider the last agenda as the ceiling of any discussion. So there's really no follow-up possible unless you create clear, actionable process to agree on a convention, to define a multilateral agreement, to put together a new institution. Then that is the follow-up you want. And lastly, on our wonderful European Union. Now, people normally conclude panels with quoting Thomas Sankara and other things. Let me quote a magician. And a magician says that the art of magicians is not simple deception, but is the construction of a reality that supports the illusion. Now, why is this relevant for the EU? Because the EU has never been progressive on financial issues. Never. Not even for half a second. But it has constructed this illusion that is always on the sides of the good ones, of sustainable development. And how does it do it? Because it wants to negotiate under closed doors. So this takes us also directly to Spain. That's what we are confronted with a push for having the actual negotiation of the process, not in a transparent process with civil society participation and civic accountability, but rather under closed doors. And outside of those doors, the EU will continue to play the game of magicians, claiming that, they are really fighting, but it's Russia that is blocking us. And, in developing countries that don't want human rights, a lot of other stereotypes, simply because that's the illusion they maintain. So I conclude by really asking Spain, do you want an ambitious process? Something for which the Sevilla conference will be reminded for, not like the usual Doha conference that nobody even remembers that it happened. Well, fight for transparency and civil society participation in the negotiations, and we'll keep up the ambition.
Warm thanks, everyone. We have eaten into your coffee break. You have 6 minutes to get refreshed. Oh.